Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to Friday. Um, we've made it to the end of the week. Although I know for some of you, or probably many of you, you'll have jobs to go to on the weekend, so it's not entirely 2 days off. But I guess maybe it's a bit of a break from school. So hope everyone's doing well. I hope everyone had a good week this week, and I hope that you've planned a little bit of fun for yourself on the weekend, if you can manage it anyway. Um, yeah, I see. It looks like most of us are here, or a good chunk of us are here anyway. So I guess we can jump right in and get started. Um, I think, as far as I know, all of you received an email from the college earlier today, and I'm just kind of pulling it up here, and I think it had to do with our kind of return to class next week, and so I'm just looking at it now. So yeah, you'll be back in class next week, and it's just a quick reminder to upload your vaccination records to the Columbia College Safe app if you haven't done that, and to make sure that you'll need to wear a mask at all times while you're in the building. So make sure you bring yours with you. Um, Again, if you want to double mask, if you want to wear two, you know, um, feel free to do that. Don't worry. Please do it if it makes you feel more comfortable. Um, the email also talks about how before we come to campus every day, we have to kind of do a self check and make sure that we're feeling okay and that we don't have any COVID symptoms. And if we do, then we're not to come in, right? And there's a lot more detail on that. I'll let you read the email for yourself. I'm not going to read the entire thing to you, but there's kind of there's a handy chart. So if you do if you do wake up one morning and you feel some symptoms of being sick, if you're stuffy or if you have a sore throat or whatever it is, you can go through this little flow chart and it'll kind of guide you in terms of what you need to do. So as I said, I haven't read through it in detail, but it looks pretty easy to follow and pretty handy. So yeah, so please look at it before Monday. That was an email that I think went out to you earlier today, maybe around noon. I'm just gonna pin it in my inbox here so that I can look at it in detail later. Yeah, so that's good news, I think, or at least I feel like it's good news for us. We'll get to go back to class tomorrow, so I look forward to seeing you all on Tuesday and actually being able to meet you face to face, because I know you can see me, but of course I can't see you, and so that kind of cuts down on our ability to interact. But on Tuesday we'll get our chance. Okay, so no problem there, Maya. I see you. So let's jump into last week. So not last week, sorry, on Tuesday. So you'll probably remember on Tuesday we were talking. Oh, I should say this before I get into that. Um, Last class on Tuesday, I did mention that I'd like to have a quiz when we get back into class. Not the Tuesday, of course, but on the Friday, I would like to have our first quiz, because that'll already be the end of week 3, and as the more I teach and the more terms I go through, the faster they seem to go. So I know we have to get on top of these things in order to get them all done. So we'll have our first quiz this Friday. As you can see, it'll be kind of a mixture of multiple choice and short answer and long answer. It'll probably be about that length, but I'll see. I have to look through that later this week and just see what length makes sense for us. Again, it'll be on the Nature of Anthropology and Nature of Culture lecture slides. So I think that'll be class 1 to 4, and all those are posted in Moodle. and as well chapter 2 from the textbook. And so I know some of you have electronic access already, which is excellent. Some of you are going to buy it next week, so it might be a bit of a tight squeeze for you to study before Friday, but I'm sure you'll find I'm sure you'll find a way to get it done. Okay, so as you'll hopefully remember from Tuesday, we were talking about human culture, a system of shared beliefs and values and behaviors and artifacts that are common to a group of people. And we said culture had these four characteristics. It was symbolic and learned and integrated and shared. And so I took you through some of the ways that culture is symbolic. I took you through some of the ways in which culture is learned, right? So we spent a good amount of time last class, I think, talking about chess game and the American football and a kind of an initiation ceremony amongst the Kwakwaka'wakw people historically. And so I, through kind of my explanations there, I tried to show you not only ways in which culture is learned, the ways that we kind of learn cultural messages and behaviors and values, but also the symbolic nature of it as well. Okay, so I tried to cover those two things in detail. The third part is that culture is integrated. Okay, and that might be kind of a not intuitive way to phrase it, but let me explain. Okay, so when we say culture is integrated, what we mean is that all the different parts of culture are kind of interconnected to all the other ones. Okay, so our beliefs, our values, our sort of normal behaviors, the things that the physical objects that we use, the way that we think about the world, the way that we interact with each other, all of it is kind of connected to everything else, right? And so the way I kind of like to think about this, I'm not sure if I've come up with a better analogy yet, but the way I commonly describe this is if you think about a car, right? And so a car, do I have a slide? No, I don't. A car has all kinds of different parts, right? And of course, the car's function is to carry us down the road safely, right? To take us where we want to go. But the car has all kinds of different parts, right? There's different parts working under the hood, and there's wheels and seats and a steering wheel and a radio and all kinds of a windshield. And all of those pieces have kind of a specific function, right? And but they all at the same time, they're kind of working together to do what we need the car to do to carry us down the road. And so you can probably imagine, even if you know nothing about cars, you can probably imagine that if you know, opened the hood and reached in and pulled out a piece of the car really wouldn't operate quite the same way, right? The car would operate in maybe a less a less efficient way or kind of a different way. Um, and so culture is kind of like this as well. When one part of culture is kind of changed or modified, other parts of culture have to respond. They have to kind of work together. And so often when we see when we see something in culture changing in one aspect, we see other parts of culture having to kind of flex and adapt to accommodate that change. Okay, so culture is integrated in that the different aspects of culture are connected to one another. They work and they operate together. And if you get culture change in one area, other parts will have to adapt and respond. And so, to give you a little bit of an example of what I mean here, pardon me, I wanted to talk about these people here, the Kapuku. The Kapuku are an indigenous people, and they are indigenous to this part of the world here. So we have kind of part of Indonesia, we have Papua New Guinea, and then we have Indonesia on this side. I believe the whole thing is the island of New Guinea, but don't quote me on that. And you can see that Kapuku are an indigenous people. This is their kind of traditional territory here in what's now part of Indonesia. And the Kapuku people are they're kind of simple farmers, and so they live in small villages. At least traditionally they do. I'm not sure what their life looks like today, but traditionally they live in small villages of maybe a few hundred people. They um, they grow their own food, so everybody kind of tends to their own little farm plot and grows the things that they need. Um, yeah, and so in this kind of small, simple farming culture, similar to the way many cultures work, um, men like to sort of win, and sort of maintain status. Okay, so in many cultures, some men or many men, are involved in the pursuit of status and respect and power, right? I think we're probably all intuitively familiar with that. And in this culture, it's no different. Men are often trying to gain power, to gain the status, to gain the respect of other men. And here amongst the Kapuku, the way you do that, the thing that you need to gain that status is these guys. Um, I'm not sure if you thought I was going to say money or something else, but it turns out that pigs are the things that you need in order to gain power and influence and respect amongst the Kapuku. Um, and again, this is going to show us um, a way in which culture is integrated. Now, the function of these pigs is not purely food. They do eat the pigs sometimes, um, but the pigs have more kind of utility. They have more use as a thing that is exchanged. Okay, so the pigs have value. They have sort of a monetary value. They're worth something. You can eat them, but the men in the Kapuku culture often trade the pigs and exchange the pigs with each other. And so, how it kind of works is, let's say, I'm going to choose Sukhjinder here because his name is right in front of me. Um, if we both live in this culture, Sukhjinder and I, and when I gift this pig to Sukhjinder and I say, here, Sukhjinder, this is a pig for you, this is a gift. Um, I'm giving him a gift, but I'm also giving him an obligation, right? And that Sukhjinder now owes me a pig, right? Or maybe more than one pig, maybe two pigs. And I'm not going to collect that pig today or tomorrow, but eventually I may ask for to be repaid, right? And normally, again, Sukhjinder would pay me more, right? He would pay me maybe two pigs back. Again, not today, not tomorrow, but further down the road, right? And so I've kind of created a relationship with Sukhjinder. I've given him this pig, and he will owe me a pig later on, okay? Now, to kind of do this, to build relationships with, men in the community and maybe men kind of further away, you need pigs, right? You need to sort of keep a supply of pigs. And some of those pigs are going to be given away. Some of those pigs are going to, Sukhjinder has returned three. Indeed, you are very generous, Sukhjinder. But just hold on to those pigs for a moment. Um, but again, very generous of you. Thank you. Um, so, so you're going to have a collection of pigs all the time. Some of those pigs are going to be recently returned. Some of them you're giving them away. So you've always got kind of a collection of pigs that you have to deal with. And of course, if you have these pigs, you have to feed them. You have to feed these pigs. And what the pigs eat in this part of the world, in this culture, is they eat sweet potatoes, they eat yams. And as it turns out, yams are grown in the garden of women. Okay, so women are kind of the ones who tend the small vegetable gardens. They're the ones who produce these sweet potatoes. And so, me as a man, and Sukjinder, I guess, as well. Um, what we need is we need sweet potatoes to feed our pigs, right? And since the women grow those sweet potatoes, we're going to need women to give us those potatoes. And so, not just any woman is going to give us potatoes. We're actually going to probably need a wife for this. So, we're going to have to marry a woman, for all the regular reasons you marry someone. But also, that woman will grow sweet potatoes in the garden to give you to feed the pigs. And then the men will exchange pigs amongst each other. And so, the problem, of course, is that, women in this community and in many communities don't like to marry men who have no status, right? They don't want to marry someone who has no respect in the community, right? Or no money or no power. And so the pig exchange is the way in which you build status and build power, but also it's the way that you attract a mate. It's the way that you attract a wife in the first place. And so, kind of what's happening here, as you can see, is that there's kind of a cycle here or an interconnection, right? If I want pigs, and if I want more pigs to gift more pigs to other men, I need more sweet potatoes, right? And that's going to require a wife. And if I want to even move further up the social ladder, if I don't want to be one of the blue guys here, if I want to be one of the yellow guys, or maybe even the red guy, I'm going to need more pigs and I'm going to need more potatoes. And maybe even I'm going to need more wives. And indeed, some of the Kapuku men have two or maybe three wives. And of course, you can see that that would make it much easier to feed a larger collection of pigs, giving more pigs away, and therefore attaining more status, right? Kind of rising up the social ladder. But as you might imagine here, there's a bit of a problem with this, right? And the problem, of course, is that if we continually want to give more, right? If I give a pig and then Sukhjinder gives me three pigs, and then maybe next time in a couple of years I want to give him five pigs, you kind of always need more pigs, right? And more potatoes and potentially more wives. And of course, there's a real limit to how many wives you can have. But the problem here is that, as you might imagine, most societies have a very or a reasonably equal male to female ratio, right? There's roughly the same number of men as women in any community. And so if I start taking a second wife or a third wife, you can imagine that there are some men in the community who actually won't have a wife at all, right? There won't really be any women left for them. And that's kind of a problem, isn't it? Because number one, men sort of loitering around with nothing to do tend to be trouble for societies, right? But the second thing is that if you don't have a wife, it's going to be very difficult for you to participate in this system, right? It's going to be very difficult for you to kind of work your way up the ladder to gain status, to gain respect, or even to be maybe seen as a man at all, right? Because lots of cultures, really in part, they define manhood by marriage, right? And so if you're not able to get married, you're not really able to be seen as a man. You're not able to participate in this little exchange system. And so, in a lot of ways, you're kind of left out of society, right? And you're definitely left out of male society. And again, that's a bit of a problem. But fortunately, culture is integrated, right? Things are connected. And so, amongst the Kapuku, like many other kind of indigenous people in New Guinea, um, they like to go to war with each other. And so you can see here, I think they're Kapuku. They might be. Um, you can see here a bunch of indigenous New Guinea men, and these guys are ready to go to war. Okay, so They've got their bows and arrows. They are all dressed up in their sort of traditional war outfits, right? They've painted their faces and they've got their feathers on and everything. And they're ready to run over to the next village and cause havoc, right? To engage in some warfare. And again, their kind of warfare is not really the kind of warfare that we're used to. Um, Basically, they're going to run over to the neighboring village. They're going to, cause a bit of a commotion. They might burn someone's house down, and it's possible that somebody might get killed. And usually, if someone gets killed, that's kind of it. The fighting stops, and everyone goes home. Okay. Um, and interestingly, after the battle is over and the sort of mourning begins, often the neighboring tribe will come and give an offering of pigs to kind of compensate for the loss of um, the person of the other village. So pigs are kind of involved in that way too. But my point here is that because the men like to engage in warfare here, some of them get killed sometimes, right? And that means that the sex ratio in this society is not perfectly 50-50. There's actually more women and there's fewer men, right? And so that allows some men to take more than one wife, and it allows them to generate more potatoes for more pigs, and it allows them to give more, right? And that will kind of allow them to rise up the ladder of kind of status and power and respect. And so, again, all of these things are kind of connected to each other, aren't they? Because we have elements of economics here, right? The woman is giving the potatoes to her husband, the man is giving pigs to other men, and other men are giving pigs to him, right? So there's elements of the economy here, right? People exchanging things that they need. There's a political element here as well, right? The idea that these men are trying to rise up the political ladder, they're trying to gain prestige and power and respect. And there's elements of the social, right? The idea that these men are kind of creating relationships with each other, right? They may be friends or kind of business partners or just simply exchange partners, but they're creating a bit of a social relationship. And we also have the social relationship of marriage, right? We have men being married to women or multiple women happening as well, right? So, and I guess actually the warfare probably falls into the, does it fall into the social or the political? Maybe both. But either way, all of these things are connected, right? The, the exchange of the pigs, the sweet potatoes, marriage, a social hierarchy or a system of by which some men are sort of more respected than others. All of these things are connected to each other. And I've said this already. Um, but yeah, the political and the social and the economic life of the Kapukus are all interconnected and interlinked. Okay, and they all kind of work together to allow the society to function. Even warfare, which sounds, it sounds like something that we wouldn't want, right? We wouldn't want people to run off and, kill each other in the middle of the night, sort of thing. And indeed, that's what the first missionaries who came to that part of the world, that's how they saw things. And so they saw the Kapuku and people like them in New Guinea. They saw them going to war with their neighbors. They saw them sometimes killing their neighbors. Um, Sometimes their neighbors would get eaten, but it's another story. Um, the missionaries came and they said, "Ooh, we don't like that because our God says that thou shalt not kill, right? That's the first commandment of the Christian God, right?" And so over time, they convinced the Kapuku and indigenous people like them to abandon some of their practices, and in particular to abandon um, the practice of warfare. But you can imagine how that would affect the rest of their life, right? Because if men don't go to war anymore and they don't kill each other, then that sex ratio is going to slowly return to normal, right? It's going to return to roughly 50-50. And when it does, that means that, whoops, one back. That means that suddenly there's really only one woman for each man, give or take, right? And so that means that every man is kind of limited to the amount of pigs he can keep and the amount of pigs he can exchange, right? And so how do you then how do men gain status and respect and power when they can't really do this pig exchange in the way that they used to because they can't bring on another wife to help them with the gardening, with the production of food. And so all of these things are kind of connected. And so when you go to one part of culture and you say, okay, guys, let's not go killing our neighbors anymore, that may seem like a good thing, and it probably is, but you can see how it has effects on all different parts of society, right? It starts to disrupt the political system amongst the Kapuku. It has effects in terms of their economy, their economic system, and it has ramifications or effects for their social lives, right? How people get married and how many people are married to whom, right? All of these things have to kind of shift and flex and adapt when just one thing changes, right? So um, this is kind of one example in terms of um, how culture is integrated, how changing in one part of culture will have effects on other ones, right? And it's not to say that some of these effects, or it's not to say that all of these changes or effects are bad. Some of them might actually be, for the good, for the greater good. But still, when one thing gets changed, other things shift and adapt. Okay. So, okay, good. So that was culture is integrated. The last one is that culture is shared. Okay. And kind of what I'm going to say about this one is that when an anthropologist is studying culture, they're studying something that's done by groups of people, right? We can't really do culture alone. But the other part of it is that culture is kind of abstract, right? It's not a it's not a physical object, right? It's a ethereal abstract thing. And so what anthropologists do is that they study the way that people interact with one another, right? They see how people share culture with one another, right? How do they behave in complement to one another? And based on those observations, anthropologists kind of extrapolate, right? They kind of build out from the data they've collected to make a picture of the entire culture. Okay, so even though culture is something that applies to everyone, it's a very big thing and it's an intangible thing, right? It's a very abstract thing. And so anthropologists observe people's direct interactions and then kind of extrapolate from that and build a picture of this sort of abstract thing that we call culture. Okay. Now, one more thing I want to say here is that, and we talked about this with the Kapuku, is the idea that culture can change. And I think this may have come up for us maybe in class too. Because some of us we had the idea that culture was something handed down from the ancestors, right? Something that is stable and secure and something that is traditional, right? And all of those things are true. All of those things are correct, right? We do get culture handed down from generations before. It does tend to remain reasonably stable and secure as it gets passed down, but culture is also something that needs to be and is flexible. It needs to be able to change, right? Because remember, we said that culture was kind of a tool by which people interacted with the physical environment, right, around us, but also the social environment. It teaches us how to interact with the world outside, but also teaches us how to interact with other people. And as I think we probably all intuitively know, the outside world is always changing, right? Whether it's seasonal changes or climate change or whatever it is, the outside world is always shifting and changing. And similarly, our social environment is always changing as well. And so culture has to be flexible, right? In order to be a tool that successfully meets our needs, it needs to kind of evolve with us, right? So as the environment changes, as society changes, culture has to keep up, right? Culture has to make changes as well, right? Culture needs to be flexible. So, yes, lots of parts of culture are very traditional and they are resistant to change. Um, but some parts of culture are more flexible, right? And they can change and evolve over time. And again, they need to just to meet our needs, right? To continue to be a successful tool for us to use with the environment and with each other. Um, yeah, good. I said all that. Okay. Ah, now this is kind of one of the last points I'll make about culture. We'll deal with this, and then I've got a short article for you to read, and then we'll move on. But um, and it has to do with how we perceive and understand other cultures. And this applies to anthropology, but I think it also applies to us as well and how we view and understand the cultures of others. Okay. Now, I think we could probably say that as humans, we are, we're judgmental creatures, right? We see things out in the world and we judge them, right? We go shopping and we say, I like that jacket, or I don't like that jacket, or I like these shoes. I like this music. Ugh, I hate this song. I love the sunny weather, right? This class is my favorite class. Wink, wink. Um, we kind of do make judgments, right? We kind of decide what we like and what we don't like. And again, that's very, very natural. And when it comes to other cultures, sometimes we may have a tendency to do that as well, right? We may hear about the way that other cultures think about certain things or the way they do certain things, the things that they believe in. And we might have a reaction one way or the other, right? We might hear it and say, oh, that's really interesting. That's really cool, right? Or we might feel that, no, I think that's wrong or horrible or backwards or whatever. And I think those are natural, but I just want to kind of walk through an example of this to get some experience, okay? Now, I don't know, some of you have probably heard of this group of people before. Looks like that guy's pointing his spear at my head, which is not cool, man. Uh, the Aztecs are a cultural group. They are a group of indigenous people from Central America, and so they live in what is now the country of Mexico, and they have kind of a very interesting they have kind of a very interesting history. Um, they were around, as you can see by my information here, they were around from the 13th to the 16th century, sorry, the 14th to the 16th century. So um, uh, kind of around the 1300s to the 1500s or so. And their story is kind of interesting because they show up in kind of what's now central Mexico, and they came from somewhere else, and we're not really sure where they came from. We're not really sure why they left their homeland, wherever it was. But we do know that they left their homeland and they wandered around for quite some time. And one of their gods, I think it was Quetzalcoatl, but don't quote me on that. One of their gods said that, wander, and, search for a new homeland. And when you arrive there, I'll give you a sign. Okay. And the sign was supposed to be a, a cactus, one of those really prickly plants, a cactus with an eagle on the top of it. And the eagle would have a snake in its beak. Okay. And when the Aztecs were wandering around, and when they saw this, they were to see that as a sign from the god and a sign that that's where they should settle. And so, indeed, they wandered around for quite some time. They did see such a thing. They did see an eagle on a cactus with a snake in its mouth. And so they settled where they saw it. And where they saw it was kind of in the middle of, again, what's now Mexico. And so kind of the orange area is where the Aztecs arrived in probably the 12 or 1300s. But as it turns out, when they arrived there, the area wasn't empty. It wasn't uninhabited. There was actually a number of other cultures that already lived there. And as it turns out, those other cultures weren't very welcoming of the Aztecs. They didn't really like them for reasons which we'll get to in a minute. They didn't really like the Aztecs. They didn't really want them. They didn't really want to give them any land or make room for them. And so basically, they were hostile and were kind of hoping the Aztecs would leave. But indeed, the Aztecs didn't leave. Of course, the god had told them that this was the place they should settle, and so they were determined to do that. And so, what they wound up doing was they were kind of pushed to the shore of a lake, and it was a really big lake, um, but it was also a very shallow one. And so the lake wasn't very deep. It had a lot of the water quality wasn't very good. Like it wasn't a clean lake. It was kind of a muddy, silty lake. Had a lot of mud or silt on the bottom. Um, and what the Aztecs started to do was they started to actually build islands, if you will. And so they would cut down trees, they would clean all the branches off them, and they would pound them into the mud. And so they would kind of pound them in kind of a rectangular shape that created like a box. And the tops of those wooden trees would be above the water. And then they would fill that box with rocks and dirt and silt and all kinds of things until it was above the level of the water. And so they built themselves a tiny island. And then they built another one and another one and another one. And they kept going until, and this sounds made up, but it is not made up, until they had built, whoops, basically an entire city on a lake. And so you can see this is a pretty big city, um, especially for hundreds of years ago. This is a really big city, and it's built entirely on top of a lake. And so there's a few cities like this around the world. Venice, Italy is probably the one that jumps to mind. Um, but the Aztecs did this kind of on their own, just one small island at a time. Um, Before I get into this, you'll see the omen that the Aztecs were looking for has actually found its way onto um, the Mexican flag. So this is the flag of the state of Mexico, and you can see that the Aztecs' original omen has kind of been memorialized on the flag here, which is kind of cool, I think. But um, anyway, back to the city. No word of a lie, built on top of a lake. Now, again, we don't really know what this city looked like exactly. We're kind of going off of the description of Spanish explorers and conquistadors who came in the 1500s. Um, we don't know for sure what it looked like, but it probably looks something like this. And again, these are both artists' interpretations of what it would have looked like. This one's pretty stylized, right? It looks just a little too perfect, but it does illustrate some of the things um, about this ancient, not so much ancient, about this Aztec city called Tenochtitlan. And so Tenochtitlan, the city, you can see had a lot of different islands. Those islands were strong enough to support stone buildings. So you can see as you get to the center of town there are stone buildings and houses. And then right in the middle, you can see there's a giant temple, the Temple Mayor, the major temple. We'll get to the temple in a second. Um, you can also see that going right up the center is a causeway with an aqueduct. And so you'll remember I mentioned that the lake water here isn't very nice. You wouldn't want to drink it. It's very kind of silty and muddy and just not good for drinking. So the Aztecs built an aqueduct, a channel to carry fresh water from the surrounding mountains into the center of the city where it came up in a fountain and people could come and get fresh water all the time. So pretty amazing technology and engineering for hundreds of years ago. Um, Now, I say it probably looked like this because, again, we don't know for sure. And spoiler alert, um, what happened is that the Aztecs and their city was destroyed by a Spanish explorer, a Spanish conquistador. His name was Hernando Cortez. Cortez came from Spain to Central America looking for riches, right? Looking for gold and other kinds of profitable materials. As it turns out, the Aztecs had lots of it. They very quickly got into a conflict. Um, the Spanish went to war with the Aztecs, defeated them, and then proceeded to tear down their city. And so he tore it down bit by bit and began to build a new city right on top. And so the current city, Mexico City, is actually built right on top of the ruins of Tenochtitlan. And so if you go, you see that giant temple in the middle, that big triangular structure. Um, yeah, there it is. That's another artist's drawing of it. Um, there's not much left, but you can see parts of it in modern day Mexico City. So here you can see there's a big kind of archaeological dig. You can see some of the original stairs. It's kind of sad, there's not really much left. But you can see some of the original stairs and some of the original foundation stones from this main temple here, which again is pretty sad, but yeah, modern Mexico is actually built right on top of this city. Um, and interestingly, that's why parts of Mexico City are actually sinking because Mexico City is built on top of the same lake that the Aztec city was built on. And so if you go to Mexico City, you'll see that some of the buildings are they've settled at an angle or the building has sunk, but the staircase hasn't. So the stairs are higher than the building is. And in some places you can see evidence of the fact that Mexico City is on top of a lake. And again, also, whenever they start digging in Mexico City for a new building or for sewers or whatever, often they come across Aztec artifacts because they're sitting right on top of this city. Okay, so why are we talking about the Aztecs? Why are we talking about these people? Well, again, I want to do a little bit of imaginative thinking here. And what I'd like to suggest is, again, we put on our little Tony Stark Avengers Endgame space-time GPSs, and we're going to go back in time, just like we did with the Kwakwaka'wakw. And so we're going to put them on, and we're going to go back to, I'm going to say 1450. Okay, so we're going to go back to 1450 AD, which is almost 700 years ago. We're going to go 700 years back. going to go back in time and we're going to go to Tenochtitlan. So I want you to kind of imagine we're in Tenochtitlan, right? We're in this marvelous city. We're walking around, um, maybe covertly taking pictures with our iPhones, maybe making some notes on what we see. We probably see lots of people moving around in the city, government officials, priests, merchants, scribes, people who keep writing, people who keep notes. Um, we'll probably pass a market at some point where people are exchanging things that they need or that they want, right? Food, clothing, jewelry, feathers, tools, weapons. All of these things are being exchanged in the market. And then we get to this big temple here, the Temple Mayor. And so you can kind of see how big it must be because you can see in the drawing there's people, right? So you can see for scale, this is a very big complex, a very big building. Stairs go all the way up. And as it turns out, when we're walking by this major temple, we look up and we might see a sacrifice to the Aztec sun god. And I think his name is Huitzilopochtli. Don't quote me on that either. Um, they're going to make a sacrifice to the sun god. And here's kind of what we would see. Here's how this sacrifice ritual works. Okay. So at the top of this large temple, uh, what we're going to see is that Aztec priests are actually sacrificing people. They're actually sacrificing humans at the top of this temple. And what they would do is they would take a knife like this. And so this is actually from a museum. So these are actual Aztec knives. They may not look like much to you. They're made out of stone, but they're made out of flint. And so they are reasonably sharp. Not as sharp as our modern steel knives, but they're definitely sharp. And what they're going to do, the Aztec priests, they're going to lie someone down on the altar, and one priest is going to hold their wrists, and one priest is going to hold their ankles. The third priest is going to take one of these stone knives, and they're going to cut them across here, just under their ribs. If you feel your uh, um, you're going to feel, or if you feel the bottom of your ribs there, they'll they'll cut right across there. And once the priest does, once he sort of cuts through there, he's going to reach in. The person's still alive, by the way. He's going to reach in and he's going to pull out their heart. Okay, and their heart is still beating a little bit, and the priest is going to offer it to the sun god. Okay, now the person hopefully is going to die very quickly. And, and after they do, the person is kind of pushed down the stairs of the temple, right? So all those stairs, all the way to the bottom. And when the body gets to the bottom, it might be removed probably by the warrior who captured the sacrificial person to begin with. And so yeah, they would actually cut this person's heart out. And so here, if you look, this is actually an Aztec drawing. So an Aztec drew this, I believe. And you can actually see this, ritual taking place, right? You can see the priest kind of cutting into this guy. There's his heart being offered to the sun god. And at the bottom, you can see a guy who was just sacrificed, and and somebody's going to carry him away. Again, that's probably the warrior who captured him in the first place. And that warrior is going to take the body, and probably what he's going to do is cut it up. He might send it to people in Aztec society who he might want to impress, maybe his military commander or something like that, maybe even the king. And he might consume or eat other parts of the body in order to kind of take on the strength of the enemy, right? To gain the strength of the enemy. So again, here you can see, I think this is a, I'm not sure, I think this might be a Spanish drawing, not an Aztec drawing. But here you can pretty clearly see what's happening to some of these people whose hearts were sacrificed at the top of the temple. So that's what we might see if we kind of went back in time and looked up at the top of the temple. We might see a ritual take place just like this one. And so my question to you is, what do you think, what would your reaction be if you were there? Okay, so again, imagine that we've actually gone back in time. We looked up, we saw this thing. What do you think some of your feelings would be immediately after seeing this? Yeah, you can use the live chat for this. How do you think you would, how do you think you would react or respond? How do you think you would feel? What would be what would be your response or your feelings to seeing such a seeing such a ritual? Is everyone speechless by what I've just described, or it's pretty gory? But what do you think? How would you feel, or how would you react, do you think? Okay. So Sukhjinder here says, he says that's disgusting, right? And yeah, I could understand you saying that. I'm just going to give people 20 more seconds here to respond before I say something. But yeah, how would you feel, or what would be your reaction to this? Okay, so let's see. Okay, so Sukhjinder, of course, says yes, that's disgusting, and I could I could agree with you there, Sukhjinder. I don't think I would want to watch somebody have their heart taken out while they're still alive. That's no, thank you. Uh, Khaled says that's their belief. Clearly, it is right. That's why they're doing it for sure. Sahajpreet says that's cruel, right? And it does seem kind of cruel, right? These these to have these people's heart ripped out. That sounds awful. Arshpreet says, yeah, take it as a brutal practice, which it seems to be, but try to figure out the reason behind it. Right? Okay. Amakshi says, I'm happy that Spain took over the city. Yeah, I could see how you would feel that way for sure. Uh, Harmandeep says they're truly motivated for their religion and can easily sacrifice their life to set some examples. Yeah, that's interesting. So, Harmandeep, you think there's kind of a religious, there's a religious element. Well, there is a religious element. We said it was they're being sacrificed to the sun god. Um, that's true, and yeah, they do seem to be, or we would imagine they're very comfortable with uh, this kind of ritual, right? Although Akamjot says, yeah, most of us would probably think this is unbelievable and weird, right? And again, this is, you know, your reactions are not. I think they're very understandable and typical. And in fact, if you remember when I said that when the Aztecs arrived in the area, the other people who were living there weren't too friendly towards them. Um, and this is kind of one of the reasons why, because the Aztecs sacrificed other humans. Sometimes they ate those other humans. Sometimes they wore their skin. And so, as you might imagine, the other the other people in the area were not very happy about the Aztecs and wanted them to leave. Um, so those are all good reactions. And again, I think that that's typical of what we would find if we looked up and we just saw this thing happening unexpectedly. We would have a very strong reaction to it, right? We would be upset, we would be scared, we would be disgusted, um, we would be saddened maybe at the cruelty toward the person who was being sacrificed. I think those are all natural reactions for us to have. But let me let me add some context here. Now, two terms I'm going to introduce to kind of have this discussion is ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. Okay, so when we're when we're being ethnocentric, sorry, that's hard to pronounce. When we are being ethnocentric, um, we are kind of in the process of judging another culture by the values and beliefs and kind of norms of our own culture, right? We're determining what's good or bad, right or wrong, based on what our culture says is good or bad, or right or wrong. Okay. When we're using cultural relativism, when we're being culturally relativistic, sorry, that's a long word. When we're acting this way, we're trying not to judge, we're suspending judgment, right? So we're going to press pause on our judgment. And again, we're going to try to understand people on their own cultural terms, right? We're going to try and figure out, okay, they're doing this thing, right? We see them ripping hearts out of people. And the question is, of course, okay, well, why are they doing that, right? What is the purpose for this behavior? How do they justify it to themselves? And again, that's kind of what Arshpreet here, I think, was saying, is that we need to try and figure out the reason behind this practice. Why are they doing what they're doing? So you can kind of think of this as a spectrum, right? And so you could be very culturally relativistic, right? And really, you know, right or wrong is judged by what a culture says is right or wrong. Or you can be super ethnocentric, right? You can think that your culture is correct, your culture sees things and does things the correct way, and everybody else is kind of, they're all backwards, right? Or they're all diluted, right? Because your culture is the one that is correct, right? So it's kind of a big spectrum of being, you could be super ethnocentric, you could be very culturally relativistic, or you could kind of be, you could find yourself somewhere in the middle, okay? So the context. I'll say just a couple more things and then I'll give you a break because I know we've been working hard for an hour here. The context is this. So why did the Aztecs do this? Well, for the Aztecs, and this may be difficult to believe, but the Aztecs felt that human life and human blood was a sacred thing. And in fact, human blood itself was kind of like a spiritual food for the gods, right? So the blood kind of running through our veins was this kind of sacred, powerful liquid, if you will, and it could be used to feed, to nourish the gods. Okay, and so for the Aztecs, the sun god, what would happen is that the sun would travel across the sky in the day, and at night it would come to the horizon, as it does, as we know it does, and then it would disappear below the horizon. And what it did, it was entering the underworld. Okay, and the sun god would have to fight its way through the underworld. There would be creatures and monsters and demons attacking the sun god and trying to destroy it, trying to defeat it. And the sun god would have to battle its way through the underworld every night, trying to survive so that it could rise again the next day, so it could rise in the morning. And whether you're Aztec or not, I think you can understand how how much we really want the sun to come up in the morning, right? If the sun doesn't come up tomorrow, we're all in big trouble, right? So the Aztecs definitely recognized how important it was for the sun to rise every day, and they also recognized how important it was for the sun god to be able to be victorious every night. And so in support of that belief, they were sacrificing people to feed the sun god, right? Yeah, to support him in his battle throughout the night. And so for them, yeah, human life and human blood was sacred. And in fact, when they went to war with people around them or when they got into conflicts, they really tried not to kill anyone because really what they wanted to do was bring them back and sacrifice them to the gods. And in fact, when the Spanish came, it was very interesting because the Spanish saw the types of things that I just described to you. And, they kind of had this, they kind of had a Kamjot's kind of reaction, right? It's like, oh my God, this is horrible, right? How can they do this? Um, but interestingly, the Aztecs felt the same way about the Spanish, because what they saw with the Spanish was people who came and got into conflicts with people, killed them with their guns, right, with their sort of primitive rifles, killed them, and then took their stuff, right? They took their gold or their precious stones, and then they just left these people to die, right? They just left them dead in the field wherever they were shot. And so the Aztecs would see the Spanish kind of engaging in warfare with their people and with other people and say, this is barbaric, right? This is awful. Look at this waste of human life, right? And ironically, the Spanish were looking at the Aztecs, seeing this sacrifice ritual and saying, this is barbaric, right? What a horrible waste of human life. Um, and so it's kind of interesting, these two groups. And again, ultimately they came into conflict, but whoops, actually missing a slide there, but they actually had a lot in common, right? Both of them, both of them valued human life, right? The Spanish definitely did. The Spanish were Catholics, and Catholics value human life. Both cultures valued human life. And a way in which you were allowed to kill someone, right? For the Spanish, they felt that, you know, if they weren't Spanish and it was okay to kill them and take their stuff, right? That's how the Spanish operated. The Aztecs said it's okay to kill people if you are sacrificing them to the god, right? So both cultures valued human life, but they also said that, well, but you can take a life, right? You can kill someone in these situations, right? It just turns out that the situations are different, right? The Aztecs kill people in one context, the Spanish kill people in another, right? So, in kind of a weird way, both groups were being ethnocentric. They were both judging the other culture by their own beliefs and values, but also they both had some of the same values, right? A respect for human life, right? The need to obey the gods, right? The idea that you could take a life, but only in certain circumstances, right? And again, the circumstances are different, but they both kind of had those similar beliefs, but they were expressed in different ways. And again, that brought these two, amongst other things, but that brought these two cultures into conflict, right? So even though both were being ethnocentric, both shared some cultural values. They just expressed them in different ways. And so, as an anthropologist, for the most part, and maybe we can complicate this a little bit later, but for the anthropologist, the job is not to judge another culture, right? Because When you're getting into judgment, when you're saying good, bad, right, wrong, you're kind of not really trying to understand anymore. And as anthropologists, that's kind of our first job, is to understand what's happening, not to evaluate it or say if it's good or bad or right or wrong, but to understand why people do the things they do, why they believe the things that they believe. Okay. So again, as an anthropologist, we want to try and be as culturally relativistic as possible. Again, that's not always true, right? We can't be perfectly culturally relativistic all the time, which we'll get to in a minute. And maybe it's not even desirable for us to do so. Maybe sometimes we have to be a little bit ethnocentric, but we can talk about that a little bit later. Now, before we move on to the next thing, I think we definitely need a break. I definitely need a break. So let's take 10, and when we come back, um, we'll talk a little bit about how anthropologists do their work and just a few other important things before we can end this topic. Okay, so let's take 10. I'll see you right after the break. Okay. Okay, and we're back from break. As I say, I hope you were able to stretch your legs and get refocused. Um, so in that last section, what I was trying to show you is not only that culture is integrated and shared, but also that the concepts of ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. And again, it's I think probably most of us would feel that we want to be culturally relativistic or culturally relativist. And again, I think it is a good thing. But, it really depends on the thing that we're looking at, right? And so, some things are very easy to be accepting about, some things are more difficult, right? And so, there's always, and again, maybe we can talk about it at a different point in this course in a little more detail. But for now, we'll kind of just leave it here. The idea that, yeah, some cultures have practices that to our own sensibilities are, strange or barbaric or cruel or just seem bizarre in some way. And again, it's kind of okay to feel that way at first, especially when you encounter something that's so different from, the way your culture um, says that things are or says that people should behave. But yeah, we do want to be culturally relativistic. We do want to understand not only what people do, but why they do it, right? What are the reasons and rationales behind people's beliefs and values? Now, to kind of to that end, what I would like to talk about, oops, we saw that already, is a little bit about how anthropology is done. And so um, you probably remember seeing this picture before. Um, I think during the first class I showed this to you and I said that this was Branislaw Malinowski. And if you remember, Branislaw was one of kind of a new breed of anthropologists at the beginning of the 1900s. And before that, anthropology was kind of it wasn't quite its own discipline yet. And so there were people that were studying humans, um, but they were kind of studying humans in all kinds of ways. And eventually, those people would kind of split into different disciplines like psychology and sociology, classical studies, history, and anthropology. And so all these people who were studying other people would kind of split off into specific academic disciplines. And so Branislaw here is he's kind of around at a time when the the field of humanities is kind of splitting into a bunch of different disciplines. Anyway, we said Branislaw Malinowski here went to the Trobriand Islands and he was engaged in participant observation, right? He and sort of this new breed of anthropologists felt that, in order to do a good ethnography, in order to do a good piece of writing that is kind of a picture of what a culture is like, in order to do that, you actually had to be there. You had to go there. You had to learn these people's language. You had to live with them. You had to ask them questions and kind of see what it was like from the inside. You couldn't just sit back and read the journals of explorers and then, pass judgment on a culture. Right? You couldn't do that. You actually had to go there and be there and interact with these people. And again, Branislaw Malinowski is kind of one of the first breed of anthropologists to do that. But what I would like to do with the rest of class, and I don't know if we're going to get through all this, but I'm gonna try. We'll do our best. Okay. I'd like to read a short article by Annette Weiner. Okay. So this article comes right out of the textbook. I borrowed it out of the textbook. It's about 4 pages, and then I have, I think, 5 questions. Okay. So what I'd like to do is we have about 20 minutes left, and so what I'd like to do is I'm going to put 12 minutes on the clock. Okay, 12 minutes on the clock. I'm going to let you start reading, And then after 12 minutes, I'll check in with you and kind of see where you are. Okay, are you halfway through? Are you all the way through? Have you um, have you finished the questions? Have you started them? I just want to see where we are. Okay, so the article again is in Moodle. You'll see it under Module 2. Um, and so I'll let you start reading. As I say, I'll put the time on the clock, and then I'll check back in with you in 12 minutes or so. I'm just going to turn my camera off here so you don't have to look at me the whole time. Um, but I'm still at my computer, and so if you live chat message me, I'll respond. Okay. So yeah, I'll let you start reading. I'll put 12 minutes on the clock, and I'll check back with you in 12 minutes. Okay. Okay, people. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you can see or hear me. It seems like people are kind of lagging and losing connection. So maybe what I'll do is I'm just going to type this in the live chat here. Um, so what I'll do is the article that we're reading here